In the annals of ancient history, there existed a state whose destiny and social structure continue to spark intense debate and profound contemplation. It was one of antiquity's most controversial entities, renowned throughout the Mediterranean, yet its true nature remained a mystery to many. Why did the Hellenes, representatives of other prosperous city-states, brimming with pride in their achievements in philosophy, art, and trade, on one hand, openly envy this state, while on the other, they would never wish to live under its strict laws? This was a true contradiction. They craved its invincible military might but shunned its uncompromising asceticism. Its warriors were feared, for each was an embodiment of iron discipline and unwavering courage. Yet, observing their lifestyle, devoid of the pleasures and luxuries customary for Greeks, many simply shook their heads in bewilderment. How could one voluntarily renounce so many joys of existence for the sole purpose of being a perfect soldier? They were admired for their unique valor and steadfast spirit, but at the same time, completely misunderstood. This civilization seemed to live by its own rules, unknown to the rest of the world, inspiring not only respect but also complete bewilderment regarding the true motives of their existence. So, who were these enigmatic people whose traditions and social structure, established as early as the 9th century BCE, so captivated their contemporaries? Their unique system not only sparked curiosity but also a genuine desire among some philosophers and rulers to adopt their methods, dreaming of similar power and stability. But was it truly possible to replicate this phenomenon without losing one's own identity? The answers to these questions lie deep within their astonishing history, which still holds many secrets and paradoxes. Today's narrative is dedicated to the key aspects of Spartan life and the most notable episodes of their daily existence. It is well known that the inhabitants of Sparta held great reverence for their cultural traditions and led a rather secluded life, seemingly isolated from the outside world within their own territory. It is genuinely unknown if the people of this state had any interests beyond all-consuming military training, but it appears they had very few. Historical chronicles preserve no records of artists, scholars, or thinkers originating from this nation. All attention was focused on sports and harsh trials, for this was Sparta. Recall the story of a Spartan soldier who, during a military campaign, dared to adorn his clothing with a ribbon. This display of individuality proved to be his last, as his comrades, to put it mildly, did not appreciate such a personal flourish, and that a fashionista was immediately executed. From this, it becomes clear that extremely harsh customs prevailed in Sparta. The men of this state were characterized by their severity and conciseness, a fact confirmed by surviving examples of their correspondence. The dialogue between Philip of Macedon and the Spartans during his campaign into Greek lands is highly illustrative. Philip sent the Spartans a message: "If I advance into the region of Laconia, I will destroy all of Sparta." In response, he received a letter containing only one word, "if." Was that not witty and laconic? Spartan society was structured into distinct layers: full citizens, non-citizens, and dependents. For a long time, it was widely believed that the harsh Spartans would cast imperfect children into a chasm, as their society was meant to comprise only physically and mentally strong individuals. However, modern scholars have concluded that this is merely a myth. Furthermore, in Sparta, such children were part of a separate social class known as the hypomyones, or those deprived of privileges. What else is known about the Spartans, beyond their reputation as a peculiar and austere people? It is also known that their diet was quite unique. Stories tell that their meals were so unusual that few guests could truly appreciate the traditional cuisine. "Now I understand why you do not fear death," one dinner guest reportedly remarked. A traditional Spartan dish was said to be a mixture of meat cooked in blood, which does not sound particularly appetizing. Children were raised with the strictest discipline, which is hardly surprising. Boys were prepared for wars and bloody battles from a very young age. All youths underwent a special rite known as the agoge. Upon completing their training, they took a mandatory examination, the essence of which might be shocking today. Courageous young men would go into the city and were expected to rob and kill subjugated Spartans, the Helots. The Spartans referred to the Helots as slaves who engaged in agriculture. From each harvest, these unfortunate people were forced to surrender a large portion to their so-called masters. Despite all their efforts, and the fact that these slaves essentially sustained and fed Spartan society, their masters showed them no favor whatsoever. They were tortured to death and forbidden from moving freely through the city streets. Thus, during these exams, the youths, as the saying goes, got their first taste of blood and further demonstrated to the slaves who was in charge, thereby preventing potential rebellions. Furthermore, the Spartans had quite peculiar money. Imagine metal rods about 20 centimeters long. This comparison is superficial, but it helps to grasp the scale of such a catastrophe. Even a person of moderate wealth would need an entire barn to store their fortune. And that's not the most interesting fact about Spartan financial literacy. During manufacturing, the money was always treated with a vinegar solution, which made the metal very brittle. This was done intentionally. It was believed that this would prevent people from developing a passion for excessive wealth. Now, let's move on to the most intriguing part, the relationships between men and women. Firstly, it must be noted that matriarchy literally flourished in Sparta. Women of this state, almost on par with men, received physical training and military education from early childhood. They were, as the saying goes, always ready to enter a burning house or stop a galloping horse. In Spartan society, it was believed that women were responsible for guarding the lands while their men perished en masse on the battlefields. Every self-respecting Spartan man was expected to be married, and they respected and valued their wives. This is why women were endowed with far greater freedom compared to other women in neighboring states. From birth, girls were granted full independence by the state. Their general education was rather mediocre. A much greater role was given to military knowledge. During times of constant war, women were expected to defend their lands alongside their men. Every woman in Spartan society was granted the right to own property and dispose of it as she wished. Thus, their rights were completely equalized with those of men. As mentioned, marriage was taken very seriously. Like men, women sought to find their other half and marry quickly. But this was not solely for the purpose of building their state together. Families were expected to produce heirs, preferably boys, who would later join a strong army to defend their lands. This task became the primary function of Spartan wives. Interestingly, they married much later than many women from other states. By the time of their weddings, they were typically 18 years old, whereas earlier it was believed that girls should be married off as soon as possible. And do you know what Spartan women did before their weddings? They shaved their heads bald. While the ladies of Athens considered their locks their greatest feminine asset, Spartan women were considered equal to men, being bold and free, so they could afford such a practice. What else, according to the rulers, strengthened Spartan marriages? The fact that couples did not live together after the wedding. Young men spent almost all their free time in military barracks. Their wives, by the way, raised their sons until the age of 7, and then, as the saying goes, sent them to the same place. Boys were given to military academies from an early age for their future training as valiant warriors of their society. And now for a bit of a provocative detail, it's a historical fact that Spartans viewed physical intimacy with each other as something quite beneficial. Two warriors would engage in intimate relations to strengthen a special bond between themselves, which aided them in subsequent battles. Thus, it can be said that these practices existed at a legislative level and, apparently, were a mandatory part of the training program for future warriors. And here's how strangely things turned out: the state needed children, specifically boys, to succeed their fathers. But where, one might ask, were these children to come from if men spent most of their time with their fellow soldiers? In short, Sparta began to face serious problems with its birth rate. This, incidentally, became a key factor that allowed women to be unfaithful to their legal husbands, a fact not condemned by society. Moreover, women quite willingly entered into open relationships and did not need to be coerced into intimacy with outside individuals. In fact, a husband could even bring a young man into the home himself to satisfy his wife's needs while the head of the family was occupied with his military duties. If a woman bore a child as a result of this union, it was recognized by her husband and raised as his own. There were, as they say, no hard feelings about this arrangement. Women also tempered the spirit of warriors, doing so in a rather cruel way. Boys weaker than others faced a harsh reality: women would insult and publicly humiliate them, with special female choirs even singing offensive songs dedicated to timid youths. It was indeed cruel. And perhaps some might think that Spartan women were masculine. Well, no, that wasn't entirely the case. Yes, girls were accustomed to sports and military training from childhood and knew their high place in society, but they did not forget who they truly were. They were distinguished by their beauty and stature, learned dancing and singing, and also had quite good taste in clothing. Sparta did not impose special regulations on the appearance of women, and these beauties could afford to look as they wished. Yes, in many ways, Spartan ladies were probably enviable. They managed their households and disposed of their property. Perhaps not all of their laws could be called right. But such were the main tenets of Spartan society: to wage war, to conquer, and to wage war again. There was no time left for love and happiness. What are your thoughts on this? Would you like to visit during the time of Sparta's existence? Perhaps the cinematic portrayals of these heroes are enough. Things were quite harsh there indeed.